So what I wanted to do is show you a portfolio I put together for a commission I did a couple of years ago at the University of Michigan in the not life sciences, I'm sorry, that's the one I'm working on right now, in the nanotechnology. New building they were building. This is the building. The outside of the building has this bifolded front that kind of bends out. And I thought about some of the pieces I had made earlier, these folding pieces, and thought it might be applicable in this setting. So I put together a presentation and flew out there and was one of the finalists and told them how I was thinking about the space and what I might do to kind of create a piece more specific to what they're doing within the laboratories there. And I did a bunch of research on what nanotechnology was, and I realized that one of the key components in it was carbon, and which is a key component in many things, but for that specifically, the carbon molecule is really important, how they can get it to work within this really kind of microscopic world that they're in. And I decided I was going to use that shape or that idea of carbon and integrate it with the pentagon and the hexagon, which are two shapes that are used in scientific illustration to identify like life and cell structures and things like that. So they're prevalent in all scientific illustration. So I took some information that I found about the carbon atom, and this is how they kind of render it. So I took this shape, and this red line is mine. I drew that on and found that pyramidal shape, and then started to kind of use it with, I don't know what that light's like there, with the hexagon and the pentagon. And you can see I have this one shape ratio, and I made it a two shape ratio, 1, 2, 1, 2. These works are born out of a root 2 equation, a simple equation, a square with a radius spin. And each one of these, there's the square, and there's the radius. And it just keeps getting folded and duplicated and creating these ribbons that start to lock in on themselves. You can see it here. So in each case, they started basically the same way with this root 2 equation, but the way it folds and links together, it creates all these different associations. So as these things play themselves out, they kind of create these interlocking relationships with each other. They're kind of interdependent on each other, but also create something completely new and different. Within this shape here, within the pyramid shape, there's a right angle right here. You see this 90-degree angle I have written in here? So this is the 120 is the hexagon. The 90 is how you find a right angle. I see that as kind of the human element, because we kind of are always perpendicular to the earth at a right angle, basically. So I wanted one element that kind of inflects humanity. And the other shapes I found based on how they settled into the hexagon and the pentagon. And then I started to play with those shapes. And all these red points are where these shapes, when they're kind of like drawn out, start to touch each other at past iterations. So that to me kind of sends the time element into the work. The idea that there's a starting point and then these things start to live and grow on their own, much like life itself. Like life forms start very simple and turn into very complex objects through a simple cell relationship or a few cells relating to each other. So once I kind of figured out that this worked, I started to do, these kind of renderings, just trying to play with the idea. And this will fold out here. And tried to see if I could get this shape to work in the space. So I did a bunch of these. And I don't think at this point any of these were actually the work that I would do. It was just trying to figure out if this system would work in the space. And it kind of takes an idea that's relatively abstract, but associates it with the specific site that I was working with. So that's kind of something I want to do. show you. So here you can see those three shapes, and then here they are. When it gets played out in a more complex way. The end result was a piece that was about 8 feet by 16 feet that bent into these three sections and came off the wall maybe about 36 inches or 40 inches or so. So these pieces are maquettes for the large pieces that are on display at Bentley right now, but they started out as a notion that was developed in Chengdu this summer when I had a residency there, where I wanted to try to create works that were much more simple and direct, and also kind of shared the idea of calligraphy, where calligraphy is both language and image simultaneously, and they speak very clearly, and I wanted to try to create pieces that maybe weren't as muddled or complex as most of my work is. So I really sought out to try to take some of the influence of that direct black and white interaction that you see in calligraphy and try to create works that really express kind of maybe a universal but also an Asian feel simultaneously. And you had said that you felt that they had a kind of a human sensibility to them. This one is actually, I titled female, and this one is male. And this was called Portal. And you saw the big versions of these at the gallery? Yeah. So when they grow in size, they change quite a bit, but they're still just charcoal and paper. So I've taken these images, and as I'm creating them, I document the moves that I make with the compass and the straight edge, because normally I wouldn't keep track of that. I would just kind of like do it innately. But with these, each time I made a move, I documented, so it enabled me to blow it up at this scale here on a piece of paper this big, and then create the big drawing. So they're kind of the discovery happens in the small pieces, and the execution happens, just the direct execution is happening in the larger pieces. I mean, it alters, but a lot of the changes that happen in these small pieces, where these are, I kind of take this and directly create it, which is something I've never done before. Most of the work creates itself within its own environment, and it's a one-off. So these are kind of like almost like doing a commission with a drawing. These two works here represent newer work that's created for this show at Bentley Gallery. And I didn't want these works to be behind glass, but I wanted them to be in frames. So I kind of have sealed these with coats of varnish. So I could kind of rub my finger against it, but I won't. But I wanted it to kind of feel natural and almost earthy or vibrate, with the blacks being super rich and saturated. And as soon as you put glass over that, it would reflect the light from the ambient light from the space, and it wouldn't be as absorbent. Right now, these blacks are kind of absorbent. They have like a tactile quality to them, and I wanted the work to kind of feel as if it has like a tactile presence, or a kind of almost like the pigments that we were working with today at the studio. The way I was grinding the pigments, this is just pure charcoal. The kind of the physicality of just the material itself on paper. You can see here I have a pile of drawings that are similar to the ones that we were just looking at that are not working. So it isn't that they're all, there's as many false starts as there are finals and ends, which I think is important for people to understand. It's not like these just happen magically. There's a lot that goes into trying to figure out the relationships and the proportions there to get it all to work together, and then to see if it has any impact when it's done. This will help. This is distilled water, so it's just purified water that's just going to get misted onto the back side of the paper. and it'll help it. It's already calmed down quite a bit. It was really, really buckling. So this will take a couple days to get this to kind of settle down. It's gonna have some ripple in it, but at least it's gonna lay flat. You can't get paper this big in flat sheets really. So you have to get it in a roll, and then with that roll you have to deal with it to get it to try to sit flat. When I'm done with wetting it and straightening it out, I'll staple it to this panel, and then I can work both upright and see how it's working, you know, as a horizontal, you know, flat. I'm drawing flat, but I'm also working with it vertically at the same time. That's why there's plastic on the wood, so I could do both sides at the same time. So these are grind pigments that I get from Kremer out of New York, and add a little safflower oil to them. And this way it lets me control the opacity and the transparency of the color I'm working with. And it's just a matter of just grinding the color with whatever medium you're going to work with. In this case, like I said, it's just safflower oil. One of my habits is to just basically start by sanding the painting down, which I have already done. Lightly sanding it, and then choosing a color, usually one that's in harmony with what's already been done with the painting, and mixing with a lot of medium. And basically just covering the whole painting with it. This will wet the whole painting, so there'll be oil all over the whole painting. And then when I paint, I'll be painting wet into wet. And I can wipe out areas that, if I want to get that blue back, I can wipe it out. But it will probably turn into a brown, or more brown, as it mixes the orange and the blue mix. It's kind of destructive, but after you work it a while, you can pull the painting back out again. But this painting probably has about 15 coats of paint, and each time this would have happened to it. Even though it didn't maybe look like it when it started. Yeah, so basically this painting, each time I've gone to work on this painting, I've given it a coat of paint over the entire surface, almost like an underpainting, and then work the color on top of that underpainting. And all the color will then be affected by this orange. So I basically covered the entire painting with an orange glaze and this will act much like an underpainting, that it will kind of help to unify all the other colors that happen on top of this. So I'll use this as a starting point for the next sitting. And I think in terms of Rembrandt in that context, I think he's someone that really truly unifies the pictorial space. And you know, even though you have this beautifully rendered face, there's a glow and there's a continuity to the space that makes it feel like it's one. It's a window into some other context of being. So I've kind of embraced that idea and work with this, in this case, orange. And I could easily, you know, erase an area, you know, to pull that blue back out. You know, and so I see painting as something that you put the paint on and then there's a great deal of manipulation. It isn't, in a sense, like an impressionist painting where you put the mark down and the mark stays, and you know, it's open painting. This is closed, where everything's hidden more or less. So if I think that this is too dense, the more I brush on it, the lighter the paint will become, and I could see what's underneath more clearly. So as I work the surface, I don't know if this is going to work, to be honest with you. So this is something, that's kind of the way I work, though I play and test a lot on the surface. This is a translucent red that I mixed up, and now I'm laying over top of the orange, and I'm going to try to a lot of these colors, there's marble dust mixed into the pigment to make it chalky and try to pull some of the oil out of the mixture and create a really kind of matte, almost satiny surface. It doesn't stay as shiny as it is right now when I'm working on it. So now that I have that set, I'm going to try to kind of even it out now. And because it's also wet, it kind of blends into it. They each blend into themselves, but this is a tube of zinc white that I made from marble dust, Italian marble dust, and pure zinc white, and already ground it and put it in the tube myself. So this way I don't have to mix this all the time. That's the color I want next. You can see it starts out pretty white, and then as it blends into the orange that I laid down, it loses its intensity and they start to bridge themselves together a little bit and get more in harmony with here, brush here. This is just a dry brush that I'm going to try to even this up with. I started to grind pigments maybe about 20 years ago when I had young children, and I would go from being kind of distracted from being a father to try to go into the studio and paint. I found that if I ground the pigments first for about a half hour, it kind of was meditative and took me into another plane of consciousness and started preparing me to paint. So I kind of have been doing that ever since. This piece is called The Sower, and it's named after Van Gogh's Sower, and it references his use of yellow and violet together to try to create the sun and the dirt, or the earth. And in this painting started with just those two colors, with yellow and violet being overlapped over top of each other for maybe 30 sittings or so. So a lot of the browns and these golds are happening by those two colors interacting. One time yellow, next time violet, one time yellow over each other. And then eventually I brought cerulean blue into it to emulate the sky color. But The Sower is a painting that's about rejuvenation and to be kind of like seeds being thrown into the earth and life being brought to the earth. And in that painting, he uses violet to try to emulate the way a plowed field looks with sun reflecting off of it. It's a beautiful painting, but he's using violet and yellow together to create reflective light on earth. And that's kind of the start of the painting, was born out of that idea.